You're listening to Unfiltered, real talk about sex and love with Ashley
and Heather. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking about the fallout of addiction and betrayal. And again, we get a lot of really great questions on these kind of topics. There seems to be definitely a theme in a lot of the emails that we've gotten recently, but we really just feel so honored to be able to answer these questions for you guys. And so we're just going to jump in. So our first question says, I left my abusive marriage for the safety of my children and myself, and my ex-husband has since passed away. As I grow through recovery and faith, I've started considering dating again. However, I've begun having intrusive thoughts about whether men around me are engaging in problematic sexual behaviors like masturbation and porn. Do you have any suggestions for minimizing these intrusive thoughts or handling them when they occur? So I know that I kind of paused on that question, but it is one of the things that I think can be really challenging when you have been married, you've been in a serious relationship, and then you're in a situation where you're single again and you start engaging the idea of dating. And it is, especially if your previous husband was engaged in, compulsive sexual behaviors, using porn, masturbating, it does kind of taint you a little bit. And you start to think that, okay, is every relationship going to be like this? Is every guy going to be someone who struggles with porn and masturbation? Are they going to be faithful to me? Is there such a thing as a relationship where we really do have this unique bond and this unique relational and physical intimacy unlike anything else? And I think even for a lot of women who are in this situation, it's hard to even imagine what that would look like going forward. And so my assumption is that her intrusive thoughts when she starts dating, or even as she's starting to get to know somebody, is this lie that, oh, he probably struggles with porn and masturbation, even though he says he doesn't, because of course you would want this to be maybe not a first date conversation, but for sure a few dates in, not too far in, but that you'd want to just start talking about your history, and what you've been through. And you would start to wonder, okay, are you just saying that you don't struggle? Are you just saying that you don't look at porn and masturbate? And I think that sometimes that can be, most of the battle when it comes to dating again.
Yeah, and I would I don't see anywhere in here that it specifically says she's done counseling or a Betrayal and Beyond group, or even like a grief group to, maybe process anything of the father of her kids and ex-husband dying. And so I would suggest those things for sure, because what can happen if you don't process grief, abuse, trauma, betrayal is you need to become an expert in yourself. You need to become an expert in understanding what is not mine to own. How do I respond to trauma? Looking for becoming an expert in understanding the behaviors of somebody who's abusive or addicted, because then going into your next relationship, you'll see those red flags if they're struggling in any way, and then don't ignore those red flags. And so become very, very familiar with what addictive behavior looks like, because we'll say, trust the behaviors, not the words. And we want to be watching for those behaviors. But if you haven't processed that, then there's a high risk that you'll go into a new relationship very hypervigilant, afraid of getting hurt again and having trust issues, which then can be self-sabotaging. It could end up just being more complicated, even whether they are or are not, doing those things. So that would be first step. And then just make sure to be really honest going in and saying, this is what I've experienced. And, what kinds of things have you struggled with in the past? And so you don't have to say, specifically, have you looked at porn? Although at some point I would. But everybody struggles. And so I'd say, what are your struggles? What are your weaknesses? What have you done in your life to be aware of those things and put boundaries and recognize your vulnerabilities, because everybody has those things. And then, like Heather said, at some point you can have a even more direct conversation. And I think at this point in your life where you've been married before, you have kids, you're probably going to be dating somebody in a similar situation. And so there's no point to avoid conversations that are about what you're expecting out of a relationship and out of a marriage.
Mm-hmm. And her question asks, do we have suggestions for minimizing the intrusive thoughts? And one of the things and I'm sure we've talked about this, but is that scripture is accurate when it talks about taking our thoughts captive. And especially if it's something that maybe we don't even know somebody, but we see somebody, like somebody that is attractive. And then at that moment, we start to have these intrusive thoughts. And really, we get to decide what that looks like. We get to decide how we're going to respond to those. And so if it is something, we talk about personal promises all the time, that, if we have a scripture that we can then immediately say out loud or in our head that's going to counteract the intrusive thought, because a lot of times it's easy in these situations to develop patterns that are self-sabotaging or that
Mhm.
are allowing the enemy to have a foothold in our thought process and in our
Yeah.
brain. And so just being able to recognize that and say, okay, when I have these intrusive thoughts, then I'm going to use this scripture, and even, carry it around with you in your purse, just so that you are doing something that's proactive that is going to help to minimize those
Mhm.
thoughts.
And Heather and I always say, these suggestions we give you are after you've processed the betrayal. So if you haven't, that's going to be your starting place, because if you haven't, if you have not processed your own betrayal and abusive relationship, we don't want you to end up stuffing things that need to be processed, because this could end up being like, oh, I'm in a new relationship and something triggers something in you that you haven't processed. So when we give you these suggestions and tips, it's assuming that you've already done the work to heal and process your own trauma. And then yeah, I remember getting to that point being like, okay, I'm just letting these thoughts run away. And I've already worked through all of this. I've already processed it. And now it's just a matter of allowing my mind to run away with these things and using the scriptures that, Heather talked about. Okay, the next question is, my husband has been working on recovery through 7 pillars and the compassionate warrior. Let me start that over. Next question is, my husband has been working on recovery through 7 pillars and compassionate warrior, and I've done betrayal and beyond. While he's making progress, I'm struggling to sleep next to him, actually sleep. He acted out in our bed during most of our marriage, and now sleep feels vulnerable. Though I trust he's not acting out, I wake up panicked with vivid dreams and flooded thoughts of his betrayal. We've set boundaries around sleeping together, but it doesn't feel like a healthy arrangement. What should I do? Um, so I'm wondering if the setting boundaries around sleeping together, if she's talking about like having sex or sleeping in the same bed, because I don't necessarily think it would be bad to sleep in a separate bed or have your husband sleep in a separate bed just so you can get sleep. And because although you've done Betrayal and Beyond and 7 pillars and Compassionate Warrior, it can take like 3 to 5 years to retrain thoughts. And so I would continue to work on that during the day. And just like we talked about in the last question, lassoing those thoughts and keeping them captive and having scripture to reframe thinking around these triggering areas if you've already done the work. But there's probably something still there. And so the work that you do during the day, I would assume will translate into the evening. When I started the journey of healing, I had chronic nightmares, bad dreams, dreams about affairs, dreams about danger, myself in danger, my kids in danger. And the more that I did the work during the day and reframed my thinking during the day, the better my sleep patterns got. But sleep is so important. It ends up becoming a vicious cycle if you don't have sleep. And so maybe to start with, the important thing would be to get sleep and say, I need you to sleep in another room just so I can get sleep as I do the work for this during the day. And then hopefully your sleep patterns will become a little bit better as you um, work on reframing some of those intrusive thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And sometimes I think even like changing your environment, if it's something that you could even rearrange your bedroom, like where your bed is. And for sure, the idea of having your husband sleep in a different place for even 60 or 90 days might give
Mhm.
your brain time to relax and reset. But you could also do things like rearrange the furniture if you can, and or paint a wall or do something that's going to make it look different and feel different for
Yeah,
you,
good idea.
because it really is one of those things that your brain knows that if this is the direction that our bed has always been, then then that might be a triggering thing, or even switch the sides that you sleep on. There's a lot of things that you could do that would help to create like a new environment for your room that would really be good for your brain, that would help your
Yeah.
brain to calm down.
That's a really good idea. And I would say too, if he was acting out with the phone or the TV, have those things out of your room. Maybe you don't have a TV in your room, so you can go to sleep peacefully if that's what he used before. If there was a phone, have it be out of the room. I mean, maybe you even want to go shopping for a new bed and like celebrate a new chapter and season of this is a new start and we're not going to go back to those old behaviors and we're going to be like out with the old and in with the new. And so I like the idea, Heather, that you gave of some of those practical things, to change up the environment. Because we've talked about it before, but if you discovered um, relapse or the addiction in a yellow room, then every time you walk into a yellow room, your brain could be saying, a yellow room, this is danger, and you may not even realize that's what's going on. And so it's a great idea to maybe change some of those things that were the same.
Yeah. So, our last question says, I'm questioning the concept of erotic haze in my relationship. What can you tell me about it? My partner is sober. She puts sober in quotes, but still feels unsafe to me emotionally and physically. While he acknowledges the issues of porn and masturbation, he's resistant to recognizing other problematic behaviors tied to his sexual history. We're 5 years past D-Day, and the process is slow despite treatment efforts. Inpatient twice, 7 pillars, and currently in Compassionate Warrior. He struggles with manipulation and control, and I've detached myself to focus on my own healing. I need validation and education to better understand this process and my feelings.
Mm.
So, when she talks about erotic haze, this is one of the things that has been definitely supported by recent research, in that historically, they thought that the dopamine that happens when somebody acts out, that was a result of orgasm, that it was specifically tied to the act of, or the sex act. Whereas now with erotic haze, they've recognized that even the anticipation of acting out can trigger the dopamine flooding.
Mhm.
And so it really is something that someone could actually stay in that mindset. So if it's their pattern is to, I'm going to be at work all day and then I'm going to come home and I'm going to be with the family, but at this time at night, then I'm going to be able to be alone and I'm going to look at porn and I'm going to masturbate. And so all day long, the anticipation of acting out is triggering this flood of dopamine, which then, of course, we know that then people are totally living in their limbic system, but their
Yeah.
prefrontal cortex, so their decision making and planning and self control, all of that goes online. But this could be really, really unhealthy for someone if they are enjoying staying in that place of anticipation, because it sounds like from her question that it's saying that he acknowledges, that he shouldn't be looking at porn and masturbating, but he's resistant to recognize the other problematic behaviors. And that's one of them, is to even allowing his mind to stay in that place, or his mindset to really just be absorbing the anticipation of being able to act out, whatever that looks like for him now, that she's saying that that is creating problems in their relationship. And especially if she's saying that she has to detach herself in order to work on her own healing, then that would tell me that there still is something seriously wrong in their relationship, even though they're, what'd she say, 5 years past D-Day, that it might be a good opportunity. She says that they've done groups, but she doesn't say that they've done counseling, that they might need to take it to a deeper level and engage in counseling so that they can work through this extra layer that seems to be still creating problems in their relationship.
Hmm. Yeah, and finding a counselor that's very experienced in addictive behaviors, because I mean, it's good that he's done inpatient, but and 7 pillars and compassionate warrior, but if she's still feeling things, it goes back to when we talk about the 3 circles, that okay, I'm not relapsing anymore, maybe. But he's still doing all these other things that are very triggering. And that's always such a tricky spot to be with couples who are healing, because the addict will be like, well, staying up late or going out with my coworkers after, after work or playing video games or whatever, like there's nothing wrong with these behaviors, but the spouse is saying these behaviors always end up leading you back, or there's still just another way for you to escape. You're not really at the root of what causes you to want to cope and medicate. And so it can become it can become a standoff right there of what do we do? And then you feel stuck and hopeless. And so working with a counselor who understands addiction and understands the manipulation and the kind of edging behaviors of just like wanting to barely stay in that addictive ring of things without doing anything that's the black or white relapse, can make a spouse feel absolutely crazy because that addict spouse is like just doing enough to where, well, this isn't a big deal. Well, maybe not alone, maybe not on its own, going to the gym is not a big deal. But when that's been a pattern of relapse or sexual betrayal, it is a big deal. And so then if you're not talking to somebody who understands manipulative, addictive behaviors, then even when you're with your friends or maybe a mentor and you're like, oh, well, she freaks out because I go to the gym, somebody could be like, why are you freaking out? And then it makes the betrayed spouse feel crazy and like they're asking for too much. So she should have her own support for sure. And then they should see that counselor to kind of work through those nuances. But I think it's good that she's saying she's detached herself to focus on her own healing. I also would suggest that, saying you can ask for certain things and they may or may not honor it, but you need to just make sure that you're taking care of yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And definitely, if you haven't done counseling, to check out Pure Desires Counseling. We have, 18 counselors who work with people all over the world. And you can even go onto our website. We'll put it in the show notes and have a free 15-minute consultation and just see if Pure Desire Counseling might be a good next step for you.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Well, we're really thankful for the questions that our listeners submitted, and thank you for trusting us to answer these and share these. If you can think about it, we should be talking about it. So please continue to send us your questions. Send them to unfiltered@puredesire.org. And if you found this episode helpful, be sure to share it with a friend.